This was the 60s, and it's known as a time of experimentation in music, literature, architecture, sculpture, and I was very much tied up into that experimentation. I looked for new organizing ideas. What I found then, of course, was the electronic age. What I did take then from the electronic organization of electronic assemblies was to examine what the elements were. I found there was always a chassis or a base upon which the components were plugged in. And plugged into the components were subcomponents, which more exactly defined what those functions were. You could take those out and put others in. And that was the way the building was built, so you could detach and reattach what you wanted to do. Electronic connections, or the raceways, or the wiring, which is another element, represented circulation and distribution of the services. So they were then taken and adopted, whereby 3 theaters were the 3 components: the toilets, the lobbies, the other serving elements that served those were plugged in the side. The connections, the wiring system were of 5. One, the circuiting system of corridors in the basement where the theater actors and so emanated from. One on the level, which allowed people to come from the gardens, which were all around this, walk between these parts of the building, but not enter to interfere with the performances themselves. Then there was the automobile cycle that went around here underneath these ramps and see. And then there's the pathway of the theater goers who come in this way and up through tubes this way into lobbies which were glassed in. The final one was at the top, which was a tower for and distribution of systems there for supplying chilled water for 3 different air conditioning systems, which had to be separate because they would vibrate and otherwise disturb the performance. It's one of the first anti-compositional. That's a very wonderful thing. It wasn't a matter of good taste. If you walk through this thing, it is chaos. I wanted that. If you want to know how it came, then you trace any of these things back to the center from which the organization is explained. Now that's rather new thinking. There are certain ways through, but you can't be certain that you'll get through. Chaotic, wonderful, and finding their way, in which process they become part of the process. And the process, you see, is what we're talking about. Not form only, but process. Process of growing, changing, and all that. To be part of the process, then, is to assume or affect the idea that the theater goer is part of the process and becomes a player in the glory of the whole performance. Some critics said it's like a bubble diagram brought to life. Bubblegram, if you don't know what that is, that's what an architect does. He takes the major functions of the program, puts them here, connects them, and gives them the general relationship one to the other, the disposition of all these things. So I went directly to that and built it, and that's what it is. It was a totally new design vocabulary, unknown to the profession. It was a shock. Then they found that a new lovely public park was being made, and this would be in the centerpiece of that park. Now that's a gift to any architect. I was free. It was a free building, you see, and not leaned up against others. So that somewhat explains it. And I had all this time, I took this time to change my vocabulary from new brutalism, which was all concrete, as heavy as you could probably make it, which was popular at the time, to the introduction of light sheet metal, brightly colored siding. You get out of a catalog. Color, I didn't care. All color is good. Very low cost things. Silos and sheds of this sort were all over Oklahoma and other states of our union. So that is another thing I'm pleased about. They were what we call ad hocism, is what I was taken by, defined as the impulse of taking this and that, anything that is available, serviceable, and inexpensive, and throwing them together to make something. So ad hocism, the variation of meaning, wonderful. Slang. Some critic wrote an article on me in a magazine called The New Slang. The best of our language derives from slang. The worst of it is discarded. So architecture is a language and should have its own derivations and own slang, discarding the worst and elevating the best of it to acceptable, if not noble, position. I knew I was onto something when I pulled these parts away from each other. Never a compact building again. A building is determined by in its construction cost by the amount of exterior wall. When I did this, I doubled or tripled the amount of exterior wall. Yeah. That had to be a cheap wall. Come out on a budget is amazing. And I did that. The chance taking known among architects and others in the 60s, I was very part of. This is taking one hell of a chance. The Ford Foundation said this is very good. Philip Johnson said it's the finest thing you've ever done. And when the thing was presented, the model, to the people of Oklahoma City, most of them were shocked. Those putting up the money, the other half of the money, were men in oil business and very conservative, and they just turned away and took their money out. That was. Then the Ford Foundation said that I'm going to hit them with a big stick. They withdrew all $2 million and said, you don't have culture in your place. So the money came back again. The drawings of this could not be produced in such a building. So I drew plans and sections and tied them all together. And there were so many facets, you see. There was no way to do an elevation. So I just said, good luck at the bottom. And I sent a chap from our office out there for 3 weeks to solve the unsolved connections that were made. And they were made, and beautifully. I'm very pleased with that, and it was very controversial, and but it's still there.